Thank you, Sabine, so much for the introduction. I just want to officially thank yourself and Emery, as well as the rest of the research cluster, for the opportunity to present or start this Works in Progress series. I want to provide a little bit of a disclaimer, and the disclaimer is that in no way, shape, or form is this session a conventional academic session. I predict that in subsequent sessions, we might have folks submitting their dissertation chapters, research articles for publication that they would like feedback on, and works of the like. And I thought that it would be, we thought really as a research cluster that it would be great to challenge an idea of what a works in progress can be and really demonstrate that there is value in taking advantage of really non-traditional opportunities as a means of professional development for us as PhD students, postdoctoral fellows, etc. So if you see a little bit of things that perhaps may not be familiar to you or traditional to you, I invite you to approach my presentation with an open mind and an open spirit. So I just wanted to provide that as a little bit of a disclaimer before we do indeed get started. So I'm going to share my screen now. All right. Awesome. Okay, so if everyone or some folks can give me a thumbs up if you're able to see my screen, as well as if you're able to hear me clearly. Awesome, thank you. I just want to make sure everyone's in tune and in line before we get started. Okay, so as I said, I will be doing our first works in progress on a piece that I created called Light Piercing Through Darkness. So I want to start off by giving a little bit of a context on my piece. So the piece Light Piercing Through Darkness was a spoken word video that I created for the IM project at Ryerson University. I actually heard about the opportunity through one of the emails we received from Jessica, the graduate administrator at the in our department at the Center of Criminology. And I saw the opportunity and I thought it would be a great way to tell a story, maybe engage in some creative tools or creative talents that I had within me that perhaps lie dormant for a number of years. So I thought it would be a really great opportunity to try something new and unconventional. And so I put in an application and I got selected to be a part of this cohort, actually the first cohort for the project altogether. We were the first start of the project. And so I really want to start this session or this conversation with a question. And the question is, what is your why? So when we think about what our why is, it might be perhaps a little bit challenging to answer, what is your why? And so I want to start with talking a little bit about Simon Sinek. So Simon Sinek, if you haven't heard of him, started or formulated this concept of really understanding what your why is. And so he has this diagram. The diagram has three circles, as you can see, the why, which is in the middle, the how, which is outside of that why circle, as well as the what, which is that very outer circle. And so essentially his argument or his position is that we tend to, in explaining what we do, go from the outside in. So we tend to say what we do, and then we explain the process, and then we explain our why. But what he is proposing is that we come from the place of understanding our why or understanding our purpose, and then extending to the how, and then extending to the product, the outcome. So really, in the context of our situation as academics, whether you are a master's level student, whether you are a PhD student, whether you are a postdoctoral candidate, or even a professor, I would argue that we have to know what our why is, because when people buy into The ideas that we present in terms of our knowledge production, they don't buy into what we do in terms of the production in and of itself, but they buy into what we do. They buy into our justifications for producing or making research decisions based on who we are, right? I know that oftentimes in research proposals, for example, there's a section where you plead a case for why you are best suited for the research that you are presenting. And so this would be really a great opportunity for you to sell or present what your why is. And so as we think about really what our why is, and maybe this is something that you've never considered and you perhaps want to explore a little bit further, one thing that I want to highlight here is that the why in and of itself does matter. Understanding your purpose matters because in essence, the decisions that you make, whether it be academic related, the opportunities that you choose to take advantage of, all in one way or another connect to that why, connect to your motivation and your purpose to perhaps focus on a specific research interest or things of the like. And so really, I really want to take a little bit of time to talk about really why our why matters. And so your why essentially is your focus. It's what keeps you motivated. I know at times in academia, it can feel, especially in the early stages, it can feel like you're a little bit scatterbrained and you have these ideas that feel and appear very abstract, but you have a hard time really honing in and having a good understanding of what you actually want to do and the change that you want to make in this society, whatever that looks like. Your why clarifies your one thing. So that thing that is very important to you, that thing, whether that's a research topic looking for me, in my scenario, at the experiences of Black men that are formerly incarcerated and reintegrating back to society, really examining and evaluating what's important to me, why that issue is important to me, would be, the value in me understanding my why. My why inspires others to want to follow me in spite of research difference, right? So we're all in this virtual space here today and we're all researching different things. We might perhaps have some similarities, but I think in a lot of ways, there's a lot of diversity. And I think that having an understanding of your why and being able to communicate your why to other scholars puts you in a position for people to appreciate your research in spite of the difference. Your why enables daily progress. So when we think about daily progress, and I'm going to speak about it, I know sometimes as PhD students, it could feel like we're not making much of it. And so that why, having a really focused and centered purpose will really help you to stay motivated and really create very practical, very tangible to-do items as a means of making that progress and achieving candidacy and in turn receiving your doctoral degree. Or for the case of master's students, your master's level degree. Your why creates a culture around your vision. So when I think about my why, for example, what I think about is community. And I actually didn't mention it earlier, but I will now. My why is, if I can, use a brief example to kind of explain my why and give you a little bit of insight on what a why would look like. When people ask me why I study criminology, I start off by communicating that in my second year, my third year of doing my not doctoral studies, my bachelor's degree, I was doing some advocacy work at the transitional year program. And in doing that work, I really came to come acquainted with many of the people that became enrolled in the program. And many of these people came from various walks of life, including people that perhaps dropped out of high school and decided to come back to school to get a post-secondary education. I came in contact with a lot of refugees, single mothers, as well as people that were formerly incarcerated and then making that transition back into society through University of Toronto as a form of education. And in the process of kind of doing that advocacy work, I came to develop these very close-knit relationships with, these people that were incarcerated and now back in the community. And one thing that I observed and vicariously experienced quite candidly is that the barriers to re-entering society are very real. The experiences that people have, particularly when they've come out of prison, they've decided, they've made an active decision to turn their lives around, they've still been in a position to live with the consequences of their past actions. And so really, that experience motivated me to act. It motivated me to want to do something about the very injustice that I was vicariously experiencing. I felt a burden and a need to get up and do something and conduct research that would lead to policy development, as well as in some way community development, right? And so what I envision in terms of my why is community level impact, which is building that culture around my vision, right? Your whys also matter, because when you know your why, you can do whatever it takes to overcome any challenges, objections that might get your way. I'm in my 4th year of my PhD now. I've applied for funding for SSHRC. I think I've applied nearly every year and I've been rejected. But nonetheless, it's the vision, it's the why that continues to propel me to move forward in spite of the rejection and the challenges that I face in the process. And lastly, I would say that your why is really a bargaining tool. So really, when you think about your why, as I've kind of communicated throughout the course of this presentation thus far, it's a tool to connect. It's a means of connecting with people and in turn getting people to feel a vested interest in wanting to get involved in whatever you're doing, right? And so just tagging off of that last point, your why in essence provides a foundation for the law of connection, right? So if you want someone on your side, you don't try to convince them with your what, you connect with them through your why. And as I was kind of communicating or alluding to a little bit earlier, this is particularly applicable for us when we're talking about research funding applications and really putting ourselves in a position to sell our research, for lack of a better phrase. And okay, so as I said, you know, having an understanding of your why is really key to be able to connect with people. And I think, you know, as Sabine so eloquently said before I started, what we envisioned as members of the research cluster is really thinking about practical ways for us to connect as community, particularly in the time of this pandemic when, you know, people are not really going into the office space and things like that. And so really having an understanding of your why through your work, through your research, will give you that opportunity or leverage, I would say, to connect in more organic ways. So in that way, you're able to connect with yourself. You're able to kind of be confident, be yourself, and understand your why. And when you have a level of understanding of what your purpose is, why you're doing what you're doing as it relates to your research, then you find yourself in spaces, especially academic spaces, communicating your why in a way that people can understand, in a way that people can appreciate. And I think it also builds our confidence as PhD students and candidates and master's students. I mean, I remember earlier on in my academic career where I felt very intimidated going into academic spaces or even talks and not knowing what to say or feeling like my contribution was not that great or is not valid. And I can definitely say that in this process of understanding my why, that I've developed that confidence to confidently communicate, number one, what my research is about, but most importantly, why, what has motivated my research, the start of my research, right? And so that ties into the second point here, which is being able to then communicate with this level of openness and sincerity. I did a workshop about storytelling, really challenging traditional ways of storytelling and using anti-oppressive and anti-racist pedagogies to use storytelling as a tool for action and communication. And I've realized, I told my story in that session, and, you know, in asking the participants for their feedback, I realized that, you know, storytelling is so powerful in connecting to people. And there's a level of genuinity that people can experience through storytelling. And so that kind of carries through this idea that, you know, when we connect with people, we communicate with openness and sincerity. When we connect with people, we're able to live out that message, right? Your credibility comes from practicing what you preach. And so when we think about our research, I want to challenge, and in this session, I really want to problematize this idea that we're very disconnected from our research, that are, you know, this is us as a person and our research is here. I think that in a lot of ways, the values and the biases and the way that we approach the world, the way that we navigate the world is very much influences the way that we approach our research, the research decisions that we make, and things like that. And so as we kind of go on later on in the presentation, I'll kind of give you a little bit of a better idea of how my values and my beliefs and my intersecting identities has in turn informed my research. And so in terms of connection, once again, connection has the ability to offer direction and hope. And this is totally a me thing, because I think I try to be optimistic and super positive. And so I think, you know, in having an understanding of what your purpose is, that there is a level of illumination that you can bring to your peers in terms of providing them with insight and providing them with support and direction. And so in really starting us off in this Works of Progress series, my hope was that I can kind of be that light in kind of giving people that open space and opportunity to also share and be open and candid in sharing kind of their works of progress in the future. And so I just want to once again bring us back to the question of thinking about what is your why? And so now we're going to kind of transition to me explaining, you know, the relationship between my why and my identity, which brings us to the conversation about my piece. So as I've been communicating throughout the course of this session here, you know, the relationship between my why, which is my purpose, which is my passion, is not very different than who I am. In fact, my purpose is very much connected to my identity as a Black woman, my identity as a Christian, my identity as an advocate, and my identity as an academic. And so when we think about, you know, what it means to identify or define your why, you know, just as a refresher, our why is our purpose. Our why is what we believe and the identities that define us. And our why, our beliefs form the basis of essentially who we are. And so really, when I was approaching my project, my why forms the basis for my story. And so as you look back to the circle, I think I have in the next slide. Yes, I do. As you look back to the circle, I had to determine my why before I can determine the how. So the process of how I was going to achieve the task of telling this digital story. And before I can determine the what, before I could determine essentially the outcome or the result, right? So I really could have started thinking about what's my story as I began the process, but I really found myself thinking about why my story is important, particularly in the context of my academic trajectory as a scholar, right? So as I approached this project, I was really thinking about what story do I want to tell? How does my why shine through this digital story? And how can I connect to others through my why that is revealed through this story? So these are thoughts that were very abstract at the time, quite honestly, but really served as a foundational basis for me to start the process of working on my project. And so what I was able to determine, and kind of going outside in, I was able to determine that I wanted to tell a counter story. I wanted to magnify and amplify the voices of marginalized people. I wanted to amplify my voice as a Black woman, as a Christian, as an advocate. And so I wanted to problematize the very traditional way of storytelling. How I was going to do that was through spoken word poetry. When I was in high school, I used to love to write and journal. And I think when I got to university, I found myself not really doing that much anymore. And so I really wanted to take this project as an opportunity to get familiar and acquainted with this, this hobby that I really loved. And I think, quite honestly, it's just been that I've been caught up with school and other projects that I haven't had the opportunity to do just that. And lastly, and most importantly, my why. And my why, as it relates to, this project, is to challenge the status quo in academia through revealing these intersecting identities of being Christian, being a Black woman, an advocate, and an academic. And so I'm going to take you through essentially the layered nature of my identities, how I've come to understand myself and in turn navigate through the space of academia through who I am. So as I said, I kind of mentioned in the last slide that these identities are intersecting, and in some way they are, but I want to use this opportunity to kind of present them as being layered in terms of some, one thing being added onto another, being added onto another, and in turn having this compounded impact. So, being a Christian in academia certainly has its challenges. I remember entering into the master's program and feeling this level of conflict, particularly because, I was interested and still am interested in studying the effectiveness of faith-based programs and institutions for Black ex-offenders. And, there being a very rigid idea of what good research is. I think it's very commonly known that in the field of academia, typically speaking, quantitative research is viewed as more rigorous in nature and more valuable or more credible in nature. And so I found myself feeling as though I was in this conflict of acknowledging this standard that has been placed upon me by this industry, being academia, but also wanting to maintain a level of authenticity in being who I am, and allowing my experience as a Christian woman to shine through my work. And so I really struggled with this idea of feeling as though my research would be classified as partial, as invalid, or as lacking methodological rigor. And so really, in going through this process of developing this piece, I came to this resolution that my identity as a Christian is the lens through which I understand my research. And so perhaps these very traditional claims about bringing your positionality or relying on qualitative research as lacking academic rigor, I can't control that, but certainly I felt a level of confidence in being very vocal about my positionality. And so even in the work that I produce outside of this project, I am always led to include a positionality piece to center my research, to center my work. So adding on to the Christian, I'm going to add the Black woman. And so my Christian identity is further nuanced when combined with being a Black race-based scholar. So my work, as I communicated, looks at the overrepresentation of Black people, particularly Black men, in the criminal justice system. And so I'm not saying any new information, but the overrepresentation of Black people in corrections is in fact a product of racist and discriminatory practices, such as racial profiling, carding, arrests for misdemeanors and things like that, to which a lot of Scott Wortley's work, as well as Julius Haig's work, revolves around that. And so really, I've found myself once again in this kind of conflict of, walking in my faith, but also acknowledging the very real injustice that not only do I research, but I live as a Black woman, either personally, I mean, I have a younger brother, and these are things that I think about, but also vicariously through community members, through family members, and things like that. And so I found myself acknowledging that these very systems, such as the jails, such as correctional institutions, perpetuate these very oppressive structures and systems of oppression, racism, discrimination, etc. And based on the literature, prison abolition would be the answer to address that. And so even though I found myself in a position of acknowledging that, I once again felt this conflict, because although, prison abolition can address this idea of white supremacy and dismantling oppressive structures, there's also the human element. There's the fact that if we do away with prisons, and in doing away with prisons, we're arguing against any attempts at reform, what we're saying is that there's humans that are weighing in the balance, that are waiting for perhaps that system of abolition to take place, to which we, in my interpretation, have no concern for those lives, right? And so as I thought about these ideas, the questions that I asked myself was, what's my political stance on these issues as a Christian? Can I speak out against injustice while also walking in love and being a peacemaker? Can I challenge these systems, but also maintain who I am as a Christian? And so really my resolution or my piece about it came through the combination of abolition, but also reform. Abolition in acknowledging that these are very real systems of oppression, and we need to work as a collective to dismantle them, but also acknowledge that there's humanity and a human condition and a human element, and reform and devising or creating reform efforts really acknowledges that there's people currently in the system that are having experiences of being in solitary confinement, of having lack of access to resources, culturally specific resources, and things like that. So I really came to this resolve, knowing that, and it may be unpopular, but I mean, it doesn't really matter, because this is my conviction, and I've arrived at it through this process of thinking and working through these ideas, and in turn having my position and my stands as a race-based scholar. And so lastly, my last layer that I will add on to this conversation is the advocacy element, right? So when I think about academia, I think about it as being very traditional, very, the deliverables are very specific. So you're rewarded for research publications, you're rewarded for engaging in these very specific tasks, I would say, to advance the institution. And so as once again, feeling this kind of conflict, because I acknowledge that there is value in publications. I acknowledge that there is value in engaging in these sorts of things. But really at the heart of what I do is community and advocacy. And as I point back to my why started from community and advocacy. And so even no matter how hard I tried to steer away from attempting to reach community, I wasn't able to do it. I wasn't able to shake it, because it is at the core of who I am. And so I in my work, beyond knowledge production, beyond doing research, producing articles, my thinking around research is accessibility. Is my research accessible to the community? When I publish something, will they be able to download what I've published, or is this only accessible to a select few people that are a part of the institution, right? These are ideas that I've thought about, and I'm going to say that it troubles me when I don't see that level of accessibility, because in my thinking, it presupposes that certain people have access to knowledge and others don't, and it points back to these systems of oppression and these structures that, as I pointed out in the last slide, we need to work to actively dismantle. And so really, I see myself as an advocate more than perhaps an academic, in that I hope to use my research as a platform to bring awareness to community issues, amplify voices, and serve my community. So particularly thinking about using my research, the research that I conduct, as a means of developing policy, but also as a means of creating a non-for-profit organization that serves the very community that I'm studying. In what way am I giving back to the community is a question that I always think about in my work. And so essentially, in kind of what I've presented to you in this session here, I just kind of wanted to give you an understanding of how I've evolved as a scholar through this process of really breaking down my identity, having these feelings of conflict and working through them. I think that the process of working through them is very important. And I can quite honestly say that I feel at peace about my positionality, and I can confidently justify some of the research decisions that I make based on the lens through which I understand and navigate through my world and through my space as a Christian, as a Black woman, and as an advocate and academic. So I want to end off by playing the video if you haven't had the opportunity to see it, and then I will open it up for questions. So essentially, this is the platform. I'm going to share the link once we, after I finish sharing my screen and we finish watching the film. So there's a number of films and stories here. So you're welcome to take a look at your own leisure and watch it when you have a little bit of free time. I really, we had a live screening, like a premiere, and I was so touched by the different stories and the level of diversity that came across through the different stories that were told and the ways in which people were telling their stories. And this, our cohort was a cohort of all academics, whether PhD, some master's students. So it was really cool to see how many of us used this opportunity to share our stories and connect back to the work that we find ourselves doing as academics. I think I have to stop screen sharing and then connect to my audio, because I don't think I did that. Okay, so I'm going to play it now. If you can just all give me a thumbs up to let me know if you hear the audio.
We can't breathe. Our presence cast into the shadows of death, fighting to resist the systemic snares that oppress Black people, my people. Why is my Blackness a threat to your existence? Why is my Blackness a threat to your existence? A new believer in Christ, yet conflicted. Tensions arose within me as I stood face to face with my world and my faith. The gospel of Christ, a message for all. Yet I couldn't dismiss this feeling deep within. The fire in my veins and the fury in my heart could not be contained. How could I serve a God that loves within a world with so much hate? How could I serve a God that loves within a world with so much hate? I can't breathe. Black men incarcerated at alarming rates, confined and chained, imprisoned and released, with shackled feet, groans of frustration and hearts of defeat. Can Christ be seen in such chaotic realities? Can I resolve my identities? Yet, in the midst of my inner turmoil and pain, I saw a light, the light of the world, a glimmer of hope in darkness. I saw beauty from the ashes of my pain, for the injustices of my society reminded me that Christ still remains. Not that my heart didn't remain heavy, but I experienced a peace, knowing that to serve Christ is to serve humanity. Surely anger did not dissipate, for I could relate to the Father being angered by the sin that we continue to abide in. Racism, profiling, injustice, and hate, all sin that continue to separate us from God and each other. I serve and I love as Christ did, yet I refuse to lie on by and wait for the sin of hate to consume my generation. I stand in my faith and as an advocate for my race. Black lives matter. Black experiences matter. But above all else, Christ matters. Christ, the light of the world, piercing through darkness.
Khadijah.
Okay. Okay, just give me 1 second. I gotta stop the audio. Okay, so as promised, I'm going to include the link in the chat here if you wanted to take a look at the other pieces. So I guess what I'll do now is, as I said, I want to fully acknowledge that this presentation was extremely, in my opinion, perhaps unconventional, but I really wanted to use this opportunity to challenge people's expectation of what a works in progress is, just to show us that there's other ways in which we can develop professionally as graduate students, faculty members, etc. So yeah, I don't know if anyone has any questions. Maybe it's not a question, maybe it's a comment. Yeah, I'll just open it up now. Yeah, Julius.
Khadijah, it's nice to see you.
Yes,
thank you
likewise.
for an amazing talk. There's so much effort and craft put into it and so much passion. I really appreciate it, seeing something that was not the usual research talk, which is it's really great. A great way to kick off this series. And thanks to all the center folks involved in organizing the research cluster and participating. You mentioned in the talk, and something that I was interested to learn about when I came today, about how your positionality and your passion and your interests have impacted the decisions you've made as a researcher, as a scholar, as an advocate. Could you share a little bit more about how that has sort of impacted or guided the way that you've approached your doctoral research project? And maybe that's like a little bit of a window to share a little bit about, you know, what's happening in your doctoral research project and the types of activities you've been engaged in and what you've been finding so far in the fields.
Yeah, definitely. That's a wonderful question. And it's also very nice to see you again, Julius. Yeah, so I've actually kind of, in doing research funding applications, I've had to make very challenging decisions about whether I should include my identity as a Christian. I've in general kind of received feedback suggesting otherwise. And I'm going to say perhaps it might be a good idea to exclude parts of who I am as a means of presenting a good application. However, in going through this process of self-discovery, I would feel disingenuous to do that. And I think I've decided to make those decisions contrary to perhaps what people might think or perceive, because in a lot of ways, as I've presented in this session, that makes up who I am and that informs the work that I do. So even if perhaps that was something that I excluded in a research proposal or a funding application, by way of my identity informing my research, one way or another, it's going to come up. One way or another, it's going to be incorporated in my work. And so I've made that tough decision to include all of who I am in some of these very competitive application processes as a means of, for my own peace of mind, remaining true to who I am. And I've kind of in turn adopted this philosophy that it's kind of better to be forthcoming, and if that means for me getting that rejection, I have a peace about that. In terms of where I am now in terms of my research, so I've completed my proposal and I'm currently in the process of working through my research ethics board protocol, the ethics protocol to submit to the research ethics board. And so in the process of even working through that, I've found myself thinking about, okay, how does my positionality allow me or put me in a position to present to the committee that I'm a good fit for doing this research, that I have the connections in the community to do this work, that I have the connections in the church to do this work, that I have the connections with other non-for-profit organizations to do this type of work. So I think in that, I mean, I'm still in the process of working through my ethics protocol, but in the process of doing that, I'm always kind of thinking about ways to be intentional in kind of being authentic to who I am in that work. So I hope that answered your question. Awesome, thank you. Okay, Wumi. Oh, you're muted. I don't think we could hear you. Oh no, so you're not muted, but we can't hear you. No, we still can't hear you. Maybe try to reconnect your, or disconnect your audio and then reconnect it. And then that might work. Okay, yeah, so, okay, sure. Okay, Io.
Hey, Pooja, thank
Hello.
you for sharing that in your presentation, for stepping up to the bat and presenting first, for your courage in sort of presenting something what kind of, personal, for sort of breaking the mold in terms of expectations and sort of setting the tone for what this space can be and the community that it can build. So thank you very much for all of that. More of a comment about my experiences with this sort of stuff. As a PhD student in at UCLA, I was trained as a political scientist, and we have a subfield. Some political science departments have a subfield called racial and ethnic politics, which was created through this process of contestation, right? And sort of related to the slide that you were talking about, there was, the work in the early years of that subfield was mostly critical theory, qualitative work, sort of embodied in sort of positional. And political science, having this sort of perception that it wanted to be econ, denigrated that kind of work. One of the nice things about UCLA that we had there was a Chicano studies department, and Chicanos are the sort of politicized Mexican American identity. But this department actually stood right above ours on the 5th floor and on the 4th floor, and everyone is actually quite well versed in the history of this department, right? It was a ethnic studies center, not a full sort of degree granting department until students and faculty members in the 90s went on hunger strike and sort of insisted that it be treated with the respect, granted the resources that it sort of warranted, right? And so scholars and students of that department make it sort of clear to everyone in our building that every department is engaged, every sort of research field is engaged in political work, right? Every sort of endeavor is embodied and situated, right? And it's really just actually a form of gaslighting to imply or to suppose that, you know, racialized scholars are the only ones doing identity work, right? Everyone's sort of doing identity work. Yeah. And so that sort of gave, you know, and so many of us, frankly, of our generation kind of came to this sort of like toxic environment and thought, oh, well, we all have to get stats degrees, you know what I mean, to prove ourselves, right? This department, many of us did, you know, for better or for worse. But you know, your presentation is a reminder that you don't have to, right? And your work can be treated seriously and have an impact, right? Particularly in the context of Los Angeles, it was very important for Chicano studies to exist in a city that's 30–40% Latino men. Thinking about identities, and also thinking about its relationship to the research, you know, one's trajectory in doing sort of research. You know, early on in my career, I was also very interested in just, you know, applying sort of rigorous investigation to my own experiences. So I was very much interested in the political socialization of African immigrants because I was a politicized African immigrant. But as my identity sort of changed, I sort of moved through life, the sort of salience and the centrality of different dimensions of my identity sort of shifted. One thing that a colleague also recommended to me was to think of myself, in addition to being a sort of a racialized person, an immigrant person, also a curious person. You know what I mean? I think, you know, everyone in this chat is an intelligent and curious person, right? And so, in addition to serving the part of you that is a Black woman, a Christian woman, also make sure you serve the part of you that's curious, right? And so, part of the reason why we're at this institution is because, for better or worse, this institution is a place that sort of allows us to live out our curiosity, right? And so, you know, I've found the salience of, for example, being an immigrant has sort of shrunk and grown over time, but the curiosity really hasn't changed. And I'm sort of kind of happy that I'm here because, you know, maybe I'll stop being curious or something, you know what I mean? I'll do something else. But I think it's really important for, you know, part of my why I realized was curiosity in addition to being a racialized person. And so that helps me explain what I do and why I do and understand the thing. Thank you.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. It's I think as you were speaking, one thing came to my mind that I didn't mention, and I think there's value in mentioning it, and it's that I in the decisions that I make, I also expect there to be a cost. I don't expect necessarily that in the decisions that I make that everything is going to work, like everything is going to work out, if that makes sense. And I guess what I mean by that is, yeah, there will be costs that I have to pay for the decisions that I make, but in one way or another, I'm content with that. And I think as I was talking about research decisions, you have to be okay with your convictions. You have to be able to live with those things. So I've kind of come to that point, and acknowledging that my identity is very important to me, and I'm not really willing to compromise or forfeit that for the sake of, you know, getting access to an opportunity or something like that. Yeah. Okay, so I think maybe Wumi, is your audio working now?
Is it okay? I think
yes,
so.
We can hear you now. Yes.
Okay. All right, cool. Yeah, so I was saying that was so motivational, and you really set the bar high for these sessions.
I'm making my goal.
Yeah, but it's okay. We will try to keep in line with the bar. And, you know, as you were speaking, I thought this is a session that really should be institutionalized within the department, you know, not just as part of what the race cluster is doing, but for all of us, because we keep saying we're a community, but if I have to struggle to remember what, for instance, Tyler is working on, then that becomes challenging. I want to be able to, as a community, I want to be able to see Tyler. Yeah, I'm sure you know. I want to be able to see a piece, and share it with someone who's working on something closely related to that, because, for instance, Ayo knows what I'm working on, and he shared a piece with me recently on female combatants, female perpetrators. So I really do think that sessions like this should be institutionalized. And as you were also talking, I thought, yeah, I'm a feminist, and I like to put that up front. And that's why what I'm doing, no matter where I'm doing it, the woman question always comes up, for me. I remember I was conducting an interview with Kamari, and I knew the person that we were interviewing. And so when I introduced myself, I said, yeah, I'm a student here doing criminology. And the lady goes, Wumi, you're no longer a feminist? You're not doing anything related to women? I said, no, just calm down. Like, yes, I'm still looking at, the woman question, because that's who I am, that's who I've become, and that will always be my why. So for me, one question that I have for you is, how do you resolve tensions of being a Christian and the contentions that Christianity was used to colonize Black people in Africa? Because that's also a struggle that I have, as a Christian and as a Black woman. And as I've come into the space now where I'm learning so much about, colonialism is not so much a discussion back home in Africa. We're dealing with whatever challenges we're having to deal with now. But here, it's so upfront in what people are talking about. And I sometimes hear how people demonize Christianity as the instrument that was used to colonize Africa, and so I'm wondering if that arises for you as a tension when you put up your identity as a Christian who also seeks to dismantle oppression. So it almost seems like you're a Christian who wants to dismantle the same instrument that was used to oppress others, right?
Yeah.
That was used to demonize other people's religion or way of worshiping their deity, and all of that. And that's why sometimes for me, I see academia as a brave space that also does not walk the talk. So people write really interesting ideas about how, laws are not the solution and laws sort of restrict us, but this same academia would not go against the law. So I, for instance, I'm a rebel. I'm always sort of looking for ways and I wonder if you can write such brave pieces, then I should see you like out there going against the, doing what you're writing about. But maybe academia is just that space where, you expose your curiosity and expose these brave things, but we still have to restrict ourselves by what policies or laws says. So yeah, thank you so much for this inspirational session.
Thank you so much, Umi, for your commentary and your question. So when I present my identity, in terms of people making the argument that Christianity was used to enslave Africans, I think about the issue from this perspective. I can have a pen, for example. A pen typically is used to write, but I can misuse the pen. I can use the pen to throw it at somebody. I can use the pen to poke somebody in their eye. I can use the pen in different ways. So the issue is not the pen in and of itself. The issue is the way in which I may choose to use the pen, or the person I give the pen to may choose to use it. So the issue in my understanding of it is not the content of Christianity, it's the way in which oppressors have used it and manipulated it for the sake of their own selfish gain, right? So that's how I understand it. That's how I reconcile it within myself, because you're absolutely right. And that's the politics of it too, of my identity, where people are like, how are you Christian and you're talking about Black issues? Like, I think you need to recheck yourself. Like, these are the types of, I went to, a few years ago, I went to one of the Black Lives Matter events, and, one of the girls, like the organizer, said something like that to me. And I was just like, a little bit thrown aback. And at that time, I didn't have the opportunity to think through these things that I'm able to articulate with you all today. So I was just like, am I a sellout? Like, that's kind of what I thought. But in kind of having an understanding really of, just kind of what I explained, it's put me in a better position to be able to justify it. And people may not agree with me, like in what I'm sharing, you all may not agree with me, and that's fine. We can agree to disagree, but in terms of myself and how I understand and navigate through space, it's through that understanding. Okay, thank you. Sabine.
Thank you so much, Khadija. That was beautiful. Everything that you were talking about from the first moment that I met you, which is when you were doing your master's, you embodied all of those things. So it's interesting to see you going through that journey of self-discovery of something that you already were. But I think it's also a very essential conversation to be had about people who may not stereotypically fit the colonial academic institution, which is centered around whiteness and sexist notions of who is more intellectually superior. So yeah, it's really important for us to specifically be having those conversations, because we have to constantly reconcile our identities in a way that others may not have to. So for what it's worth, which I don't think it really matters. What really matters is how you see yourself. But I think the rest of us have always seen you as this, powerhouse who is Christian, Black, an advocate, and so much more. Apparently, we should add artists to the repertoire as well. So I guess I wanted to say that. And I think that but it's also important to sit in it and have those conversations with yourself, because even if you present yourself in a way and you know who you are spiritually or within your soul or within the essence of you, when you're questioned or put on the spot to respond to these things, sometimes it can be challenging, especially in an academic space where they demand a very specific kind of answer, and often is not what they get. And so suddenly you become sort of the representative of all other Black women who are Christian in the academia who are doing similar work. So it's a lot of a lot of baggage to hold on to when you're put on that pedestal to represent everyone. So, but you do it beautifully, and that's a whole nother thing altogether, to be put on a pedestal, doing really well, but struggling in the background, and people are like, oh, you're so powerful, but then you're barely waking up the next morning from all of the exhaustion of always having to be perfect. So yeah, and speaking of brave spaces, I think that you going through the journey of being addressed certain questions and then taking the time to reflect on it, really important and beautiful for academics, because we're like humans that are constantly growing and evolving, right? So we can't really judge our entire existence based off of one moment in life. In fact, like, there were a whole host of events that led us to that moment and will help us to continue to grow as long as we're capable of sitting in that like place of growth and self-understanding. What I will say about the the connections that you were making with between your Christianity, abolition, and race, in my mind it clicks so like easily. Of course it makes sense, because dismantling and abolition is a very important issue. I think Christianity forbids people it's a sin to confine people in Christianity, as far as I understand, because it is a sin in Islam, and I imagine it might be something similar.
I'm gonna say I don't know.
Okay, that's okay.
Yeah.
So abolition absolutely makes sense, because religiously it's like it's not inhumane to confine someone in that way. You're not even supposed to confine animals, let alone human beings. So in my mind, like, it makes sense, because when confinement is not the answer, that means like humans have to deal with human problems, not just lock them away somewhere else or cart them off somewhere else. So I would love to have that conversation with you further. It has sparked so many different ideas in my mind. But I'm just rambling now. Thank you so much for your presentation. It was exactly the kick that I needed to start off the semester.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Sabine, so much for your comments. Yeah, I just want to say in no way was I attempting to create a tall order in doing this. I actually kind of in one way or another questioned myself and really whether this was the forum to do something like this, because as I disclosed at the beginning, it's very unconventional in how I went about doing this. And I'm sure it's, works in progress don't look like this. So I just did what felt right. And my goal is that in me being open and honest and transparent, that other future presenters would feel that freedom to do the same, and bringing forth things that they might be thinking about and are not really sure about, and things like that. So that was really kind of my goal and objective. I'll just say briefly in regards to your comment about feeling like I'm on this pedestal. In no way, shape, or form. That's too much, quite honestly, to try to put myself on a pedestal and try to represent all Black women. I don't do that because I'm just one person, and we all have unique experiences, even though we may share race as a similarity, or other things as a similarity. I think that we all are on a unique trajectory, and yeah, I can certainly be an example, but in no way do I ever try to represent, because that's putting a lot on myself that I don't think I necessarily have the capacity to do. So I just wanted to provide that disclosure. Professor Duber, I think you had your hand up for quite some time.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can.
Okay,
yes.
sorry. Yeah, I walked into this awesome presentation and I just got like an email and then tweets, and so I just joined up, and I hope I'm not crashing this event, because you're sharing awesome and very personal and very powerful things. So I'm like I'm sorry if that's what happened, but I figured I should come out of the shadows and kind of, at least, join if I may. So I'm affiliated with the Criminology Center, have been for forever. But right now I'm running the Center for Ethics, and that's the Center for Ethics, seminar room and but that's not real. It's it's fake. I'm at home. And so at the Center of Ethics, we have something that's called the Race, Ethics, and Power Project, which has been going on for now, I think, a year and a half. And it looks to me like that what's evolving at Criminology is present is something similar. And so I want to say, like, this project at the Center of Ethics is totally run by racialized scholars, and so I certainly wouldn't show up at at an event like this. So again, apologies, but I do want to, if I may, respond to what I thought was kind of a very powerful presentation, which at least in kind of in a way, to the extent I think I may be able to, because one of the things that we're interested in at the Center of Ethics is also doing engaged scholarship and reaching audiences, who may otherwise not be reached through whatever traditional academic work. And so I was very impressed and moved by the video, and I really appreciate the kind of use of different forms of media to communicate with people within academia and outside. So I'm kind of curious if you personally, or you at the Criminology Center, are exploring things like using YouTube, or we're big on TikTok, for example, kind of other ways of reaching an audience and engaging an audience, kind of about the your own work, or kind of the projects or the vision of the center, or so in other words, not kind of just advertising what you're doing, but substantively kind of communicating a message and your research findings through these channels, because it sounds like you have kind of you're already very good at it. So I'm curious if that is something in your own work you've explored, and perhaps you as a group are exploring, and more broadly the Criminology Center.
Yeah.
And again, thanks for having me, and I apologize for anyway.
Yeah. So everyone is more than welcome to join us. So I just want to thank you for taking time out of your Friday morning to join us, and your great question as well. I think for me, as I said in my presentation, I really value accessibility and making my research accessible. So this might be an unpopular statement, but I'll make it anyways. I'm not very, article publication is a thing to do, but it bugs me, particularly because, as I said, so for example, I did a book chapter with Professor Scott Wortley, as well as Professor Kwasi Wosu-Bempa. And it was a book chapter, and I can't download it, or I can't share it. So there might be people in the community that would want to read about this article, and it's just not accessible, right? So in me using multiple forms of media, my goal and my intention is to make my research both physically accessible, but also intellectually accessible, because even if things are at times physically accessible, you read it and you're like, I don't even know what this scholar is trying to say. So maybe somebody in the community will definitely not know what they're trying to say. So I definitely will find myself, I actually always find myself exploring and thinking about different projects that can advance me in terms of professional development, but also help me build a portfolio and thinking about ways to disseminate knowledge that I produce through my work. Most definitely. I can't really necessarily speak to some of the ways in which our department is doing this type of work. I know that the cluster is looking to develop very non-traditional ways of disseminating knowledge. I think we had the art thing, right? The art exhibit project that we wanted to work on.
Yeah, so we're in our infancy. This is I guess like we started June of last year, and this is it's a lot to take on, and there's very few of us, and we're very excited, and we have a lot of ideas, and of course, like the stuff that you mentioned is definitely one of the ways in which we could start this conversation, and also reach out to a broader BIPOC community. but we're in our infancy is all I'm gonna say, and it takes a lot, and there's so many like red tapes, and there's like a lot of bureaucratic processes that you have to go through in order to get anything approved. But as long as people like Khadija and Emery and Umi and other wonderful people exist, we're gonna keep trying to get through the red tape and do this work. But I think that it got tabled. So we are looking into getting in artists in residence to like, you know, develop some cool ways to interact with ideas of law through art. And it's one of my passion projects, but for the time being, we have other priorities. And you're always welcome to come and drop by. This is not a BIPOC exclusive space.
Well, thank you very much. And again, I also want to apologize for not turning on my video before. You might have thought like, who's this weirdo? Like, anyway, that was me. So for better or worse.
Thank you so much. Does anyone else have any other questions? I will say, if there's anyone that's interested in engaging in this project, I know that they just did their second cohort. I don't know if Amy minds me putting her on the spot, but Amy is a part of the cohort for this year. And so I think they'll most likely probably be doing a cohort next year, like around September or October or something like that. So if you were somebody that was interested in engaging in this type of project, you're more than welcome to reach out. I'm more than happy to answer any questions. If you want me to look over your statement or anything like that, I'm more than happy to help. Yeah, I know that, you know, getting any help would be helpful in the process of applying for something like this. So yeah, I'm more than happy to answer any questions that anyone has. Even if it's not today, but later down the line when you do see the call out again.
And also, I know there's only a few of us left, but if you are interested in being one of the members of the cluster, please reach out to us, me, Khadija, or Hoybin, or Emery. We'd be more than happy to talk to you about the process and pass on the torch for the next year. So feel free to reach out. We also have a spot available for MA students. If, you know, I know that this year, MA students didn't really get enough opportunity to sign up, but starting next year, we're trying to ensure that they're, you know, it's better publicized. And also, if you know someone who's starting their master's program next year, please let them know of this opportunity. I think that's all from us, unless there's any last questions or comments.